Book Summary: Equity for Women in Science, Dismantling Systemic Barriers to Advancement by Cassidy R. Sugimoto and Vincent Larivière. Enjoyed the video. Please subscribing to my channel for more great content like this. You'll be notified when I upload new videos. Equity for Women in Science likely explores the persistent gender disparities in scientific fields and proposes strategies for creating a more equitable environment for women in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Sugimoto and Larivière, both experts in scientometrics and information science, probably draw on extensive research and data analysis to paint a comprehensive picture of the challenges women face in scientific careers. The book likely begins by outlining the current state of gender representation in various scientific disciplines, showing how women are often underrepresented, especially in leadership positions in certain fields like physics and engineering. The authors probably discuss how this underrepresentation is not due to lack of interest or ability, but rather to systemic barriers and biases that women encounter throughout their educational and professional journeys. A key theme of the book is likely the exploration of the various factors contributing to gender inequity in science. This might include discussions on implicit bias, stereotypes, work-life balance issues, lack of mentorship, and structural barriers within academic and research institutions. The authors probably present research findings that demonstrate how these factors impact women's career progression, publication rates, citation counts, and overall recognition in the scientific community. The narrative probably emphasizes the importance of addressing these issues not just for the sake of fairness, but also for the advancement of science itself. Sugimoto and Larivière likely argue that diverse perspectives and experiences are crucial for innovation and solving complex scientific problems. The book probably concludes with a series of recommendations for improving equity in science. These might include policy changes, mentorship programs, bias training, and structural reforms in academic institutions and funding agencies. Here are 5 general examples of how the book's insights might be applied. 1. A university implements a blind review process for grant applications and job candidates, leading to a more diverse pool of selected researchers and faculty members. 2. A scientific journal adopts policies to ensure gender balance in peer reviewers and editorial boards, resulting in a more equitable publication process. 3. A research institution establishes a comprehensive mentorship program pairing senior women scientists with early career researchers, leading to improved retention and career advancement for women in the field. 4. A national science funding agency introduces targeted grants for women researchers, particularly in fields where they are underrepresented, helping to close the funding gap. 5. A tech company revises its hiring practices and workplace policies to be more inclusive, resulting in increased recruitment and retention of women in technical roles. The book likely discusses the intersectionality of gender with other factors such as race, ethnicity, and socioeconomic background, acknowledging that women from minority or disadvantaged groups often face compounded challenges in scientific careers. Sugimoto and Larivière probably explore the concept of scientific impact and how traditional metrics might disadvantage women. They might propose alternative ways of measuring scientific contribution that could lead to more equitable recognition and career advancement. The narrative may touch on the role of men as allies in promoting gender equity in science. The authors might offer strategies for male colleagues and leaders to actively support and advocate for their female counterparts. The book likely also discusses the importance of institutional and cultural change. The authors probably argue that while individual efforts are important, systemic changes are necessary to create lasting equity in scientific fields. Overall, Equity for Women in Science appears to be a comprehensive examination of gender disparities in scientific fields, offering data-driven insights and practical strategies for creating a more inclusive and equitable scientific community. By presenting gender equity as not just a moral imperative but also a catalyst for scientific progress, Sugimoto and Larivière offer a compelling case for change in the scientific world. Key takeaways. Gender parity in scientific research does not guarantee gender equity. A global publishing gap prevails between men and women in science. A scientific journal byline is the main form of public credit for research. Men's names are likelier to appear in the high-status first or last slots. Women scientists are less likely to apply for grants and to receive them. Mobility can accelerate opportunities. To measure the impact and output of scientists, research citations are less biased than awards. Society tends to think of scientists as men. Overcoming gender inequities in science requires action from multiple parties. Summary: gender parity in scientific research does not guarantee gender equity. Women scientists have achieved or surpassed parity with male scientists in terms of papers they publish and other measures of output and impact. Yet a parity paradox persists in which women in science often receive lower pay and less recognition for their work than men receive for theirs. Parity in science is a valuable goal, but one that should not be pursued at the expense of equity. Gender inequity in science has origins stretching back centuries. In the 18th and early 19th centuries, the work of pioneering women scientists such as paleontologist Mary Anning was overlooked and forgotten. By the late 19th century, exceptions had occurred, including physicist Hertha Ayrton, who earned awards and recognition, and who published in the leading journals of her era. Advances for women scientists came slowly. For example, the journal Nature did not change the slogan in its mission statement from Men of Science to Scientists until the year 2000. Women's participation in science decreased in the 20th century when the sciences, formerly an amateur pursuit, became professionalized. That fueled the exclusion of women. In the early 20th century, a woman with a science degree might still find work only as an assistant. When Nobel Prize winner Marie Curie visited the United States, her publicity presented her in a caregiving role, for instance, as someone seeking a cure for cancer, not as a scientist. Women often contributed to science while working with their husbands, whose names could appear on papers, while theirs often could not. In the early 1900s, Lillian Mahler Gilbreth published on industrial engineering with her husband Frank Gilbreth, with whom she had a dozen children. Their publisher insisted on showing her byline as L.M. Gilbreth, without using her full name. When her husband died in 1924, engineering societies excluded Gilbreth, forcing her into industrial psychology. An apocryphal story says that Edward Pickering, who became director of the Harvard Observatory in 1877, got fed up with his assistants, swore his housekeeper Williamina Peyton Fleming could do better, and hired her. Over the course of 30 years, she made a name for herself as a leading astronomer, spoke publicly and hired other women scientists, setting a trend in U.S. observatories. Yet, 20 years into her career of stellar service, the observatory refused to give Fleming a raise, saying dismissively that she was making an excellent salary for a woman, and she is said to have worked herself to death. In 1931, one of the scientists Fleming hired, Annie Jump Cannon, became the first woman to win the Henry Draper Medal for research in astrophysics, but a demeaning journalist portrayed her as housekeeping among the stars. In 1956, Dr. Cecilia Payne-Gaposchkin became Harvard's first female professor of astronomy, and eventually the first chair of its astronomy department, though it paid her less than it paid her male counterparts. A global publishing gap prevails between men and women in science. Men, on average, enter leadership roles earlier in their careers, and that has an impact on perpetuating inequity for years or decades to come. One manifestation of this issue is the gender gap that persists in publications and journals in nearly every country, with male scientists outpublishing women by significant margins across all scientific disciplines except health. Until countries reach gender parity in the production and fair attribution of research, their women scientists are unlikely to achieve equity. And if they reach parity because men leave for other countries or abandon the field, that result is not really due to equity. A scientific journal byline is the main form of public credit for research. Men's names are likelier to appear in the high-status first or last slots. Today, the dominant form of credit for scientific research is being bylined as an author of a scientific paper. Men are far more likely to be the sole author of scientific papers than women, though solo authorship is rare today even for men. Listing several co-authors on journal articles has become the norm, but women are often pushed aside. Because men tend to have more seniority and power, their names appear on more papers. On collaborative papers, men tend to make authorship credit decisions without consultation more often than women do in a similar role. Women find themselves in proportionately more authorship disagreements than men, which likely harms their future collaborative opportunities. These self-reinforcing cycles perpetuate inequities. Our results suggest that both men and women acknowledge inequities in the distribution of authorship along gendered lines. In one persistent trend, theoretical work receives disproportionate credit over empirical work. Author lists too frequently omit women who often contribute essential research, including statistical analysis. When women do receive co-author credit, they appear only 25% of the time in the most prestigious place on the list, last, denoting senior team leaders. Men also dominate the first slot, sometimes junior scholars, the second most prestigious position. Women scientists can close this gap only when they lead the research and thus appear as corresponding authors in the last slot or receive roughly half of first author credits. When men are corresponding authors, they tend to credit other male authors higher in the pecking order than their contributions merit. In scientific research, women tend to focus on experimentation and analysis, while males, even mid-list authors, tend to focus more on leadership-related activities, such as conceptualization and review. Regardless of how many members a research team has, women tend to perform most of the experimentation. They are 18% more likely than men to have worked directly on research experiments and contributed to data analysis. Lead women on research teams typically do more of the work than lead men. Data on who contributes to scientific works offers a vital perspective in examining gender imbalances in research and output. Women frequently earn their place as journal article co-authors by conducting experiments, while men earn credit for designing research and obtaining funding. This tends to position women's bylines mid-list, while men appear first and last more frequently. Women also are 6% more likely to write the first draft of a paper, and men are 9% more likely to edit it, further contributing to the power imbalance in science publishing. Lists of authors seldom reflect the scope of women's contributions. Certain contributions are more lucrative, from the perspective of academic capital, and these are more likely to be associated with men. One of the more egregious attribution injustices against a female scientist occurred in the 1950s with the discovery of DNA. James Watson and Francis Crick won the Nobel Prize for discovering DNA, but chemist Rosalind Franklin had published an earlier, more detailed and precise account, including photographs. Franklin's work was hands-on, while Crick's and Watson's contributions were theoretical and built on her efforts. Franklin died before Watson and Crick received the Nobel. If she had lived, perhaps she might have shared the prize. However, science textbooks and common knowledge attribute the discovery of DNA to Crick and Watson. Few sources mention Franklin. The number of citations a scientist's papers and books accrue provides a reasonable way to measure his or her impact. Many researchers consider citations the currency of the scientific ecosystem and, if so, women suffer more impoverishment than men. Articles with at least one male author or one female author receive equal citations overall, as do papers with sole authors, regardless of gender. However, when women's names appear in the two dominant positions on author lists, their papers receive fewer citations. Journals should adopt policies requiring fair contribution statements. More than 120 journals have acted to enforce equitable credit by adopting a formal system, Project Credit's Contribution Roles Taxonomy. This system, the result of an effort launched in 2012 by Harvard and the Wellcome Trust, is designed to clarify women's contributions. Women scientists are less likely to apply for grants and to receive them. Overall, women are less likely to apply for grant funding than men, and they tend to win smaller grants. Men's average annual grant amounts are 30% higher than women's, $220,000 compared to $170,000, with greater gaps in biomedicine, health, and clinical medicine. Women are even with men in physics. A comprehensive analysis of millions of American and Canadian papers and their links to funding reveals moderately higher levels of funding for women in just 3 fields: engineering, math, and chemistry. Because only the strongest women thrive in these male-dominated arenas, they are the elite, and that may be why they attract more funding relative to men. Women are more likely to be funded in fields where they account for a small percentage of researchers, such as engineering, physics, earth and space sciences, and, to a lesser extent, mathematics. In total, however, trends indicate less funding for women scientists, and so less research by women, which leads them to publish fewer articles, which means winning fewer grants. These disparities stem, in part, from bias in favor of well-known scholars and prestigious institutions. This creates a disadvantage for women in a profession where government research grants are a vital lifeline, even in universities. Mobility can accelerate opportunities. As recently as the late 1800s, most prestigious Western universities did not grant degrees to women. Swiss and German institutions were the exception and drew women from the United Kingdom, the United States and elsewhere. During World War II, the reverse happened. Many female European scholars came to the United States to flee the conflict. Decades later, women scientists from Ethiopia, India, and elsewhere followed. Historians of science have focused on the role that war plays as a catalyst in scientific mobility, as seen, for example, in the large influx of scientists to the United States in the throes of World War II. Italian-born neurobiologist and eventual Nobelist Rita Levi-Montalcini, for example, left Italy in 1946 for Washington University for a one-semester research fellowship. She stayed for 20 years. Mobility is often critical to a scientist's career. But women prove to be less mobile than men, especially as they age. Though it's difficult to measure, young male and female researchers change locations at nearly identical rates, though men are somewhat more likely to undertake an international relocation. Over their careers, male scientists generally work in more countries than women. To measure the impact and output of scientists, research citations are less biased than awards. Women of high achievement in the sciences have remained largely invisible to the Nobel Committee, despite clear and at least equal contributions to efforts that led to their male collaborators' Nobel Prizes, though Marie Curie's 2 Nobels stand as an exception. Science is not a meritocracy. Many factors affect who gets to do science and who receives credit for it. Of the 714 Nobel Prizes awarded in the sciences between 1901 and 2021, only 25 went to women. When Donna Strickland, a University of Waterloo associate professor, won for physics in 2018, it had been 55 years since the previous female winner in that field. Just months before her Nobel, Wikipedia rejected Strickland's application for a page on the grounds that she didn't meet its notability standard. Society tends to think of scientists as men. In experiments, reviewers who assess papers with randomly assigned male or female bylines rate papers with male-sounding names significantly higher. In competition for jobs, reviewers show bias in assuming women won't be as open to relocation as men. Hiring managers rate women lower than men with equal qualifications, and offer them less money. Despite equal pay efforts, women, especially mothers, in the sciences in the United Kingdom suffer up to a 24% gender pay gap versus men with similar credentials in the same roles. We find gender disparities in funding, with women less likely to have received a grant. This leads to cycles of disparity. When women's work is not funded, they produce less, thereby leading to lower rates of funding. Inequities in science throughout history have often outright denied women eligibility for patents and financial rewards. For example, Catherine Littlefield Greene was instrumental in inventing the cotton gin. And Harned Manning invented important agricultural tools. In both cases, incredible wealth followed these inventions, but neither Greene nor Manning received anything. Marie Curie and Lillian Galbraith set high standards for achieving unparalleled science while raising children, but for most women, this dual role takes a toll on research output. Analysis of heterosexual marriages between scientists reveals that research output suffers among those whose marriages produce children, with women suffering most of the loss. Overcoming gender inequities in science requires action from multiple parties. Many parties have a role to play in improving the position of women in the sciences. Male scientists should seek female collaborators and support them in leadership roles. Lecturers should balance their curricula with more references to the work of women scientists. Universities should revisit their hiring and promotion practices. Funders should make research support and grants equally available to women and men. Publishers should audit their peer review processes for bias. Professional societies and other grantors should ensure that an equitable number of women receive their grants and invitations to speak at their events. And no one should have to face sexual discrimination of any kind.